must listen to us. We are crying. Protests are peaceful, but we are being tear-gassed. We are just crying to be heard. Listen to us. Life is hard. We are crying. We are crying.
Arson, vandalism, violent protests, deaths, and more. What started with the tax reform bill ended into a nightmare for Kenya. On June 25th, Kenya was plunged into unrest and chaos as thousands of citizens flooded the streets of Nairobi, actively opposing the government's proposed tax reform bill currently under parliamentary scrutiny. The protests, primarily driven by youth discontent, swiftly descended into scenes of violence and confrontation between demonstrators and law enforcement. In Nairobi, the epicenter of the unrest, tear gas and rubber bullets filled the air as security forces attempted to disperse the increasingly agitated crowds. The confrontations led to the shutdown of businesses and paralyzed transportation across the city, leaving streets deserted except for the echoes of protests and the heavy presence of armed police. Now, amidst the turmoil, parts of the Parliament building and the office of Nairobi's governor were reportedly set ablaze by enraged demonstrators, marking a dramatic escalation in the unrest. Reports suggest that vehicles near the Supreme Court, adjacent to the City Hall, were also torched, reflecting the intensity of public anger over the proposed fiscal measures. The Kenya Medical Association reported a grim toll from the violence. At least 10 fatalities and 31 injuries as clashes intensified throughout the day. Initial attempts by authorities to quell the unrest with tear gas and water cannons proved ineffective, leading to the use of live ammunition in a bid to regain control. Why is Kenya angry? Why are Kenyans protesting against the finance bill? How will the government address the economic grievances fueling these protests? What impact will Kenya's escalating debt burden have on future economic stability? Now, the protests are rooted in widespread discontent over the 2024-25 finance bill, which aims to raise $2.7 billion through increased taxes to elevate the country's mounting budget deficit and reduce reliance on external borrowing. Despite recent concessions on certain taxes, including essential commodities, public dissatisfaction remains high amid soaring living costs. Beyond Nairobi, protests have rippled across various Kenyan cities and towns, reflecting broader frustration with the economic policies of President William Ruto's administration. Now, demonstrators are demanding a complete rollback of the proposed tax hikes, arguing that they will accentuate the economic hardships already burdening ordinary Kenyans.
Today's events mark a critical turning point on how we respond to grave threats to our national security. I assure the nation that the government has mobilized all resources at the nation's disposal to ensure that a situation of this nature will not recur again, at whatever cost.
Now, President William Ruto addressed the nation, expressing grave concern over the escalating violence and reaffirming the government's commitment to maintaining security and fostering dialogue. After protests, Kenya's President William Ruto vowed to take a tough line against violence and anarchy. He acknowledged the economic challenges facing Kenyans but defended the necessity of fiscal reforms to stabilize the economy and attract crucial international investments. The violence has drawn international attention, prompting advisories from the Indian Embassy urging caution for its nationals in Kenya amidst the unrest. Now, the protests have also seen participation from prominent figures, including the half-sister of former US President Barack Obama. She experienced firsthand the forceful dispersal tactics employed by authorities. Now, the protests stem from profound dissatisfaction with the 2024-25 Finance Bill, a pivotal legislative proposal outlining the government's fiscal strategy for the upcoming financial year, starting in July. At its core, the bill seeks to generate $2.7 billion through heightened taxes aimed at elevating Kenya's escalating budget deficit and reducing dependency on external borrowing. Kenya's current public debt stands at an alarming 68% of its GDP, surpassing the recommended threshold of 55% advised by global financial bodies like the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. Coupled with acute liquidity challenges and uncertainties surrounding access to international financial markets, Kenya has turned to the IMF for financial support, contingent upon meeting stringent revenue targets outlined in the finance bill. Now, protesters vehemently oppose the proposed tax hikes, fearing their adverse impact on an already strained economy and the accentuation of living costs. This isn't the first instance of public resistance to fiscal measures. In the preceding year, under President William Ruto's leadership, a similar finance bill introduced contentious housing taxes and raised the top personal income tax rate, provoking nationwide protests and legal challenges. Now, these events underscore a recurring pattern of public backlash against perceived burdensome taxation and economic policies. Now, in conclusion, the unrest in Kenya highlights profound grievances over economic policies that threaten to further burden its populace. As tensions persist and pressure mounts on the government to address the crisis, the words of Nelson Mandela resonate. To deny people their human rights is to challenge their very humanity. Now, the road ahead for Kenya necessitates not only economic reform but also genuine efforts to address the legitimate concerns of its people with empathy and urgency.